I've been using Node-RED as part of my smart home ever since I started doing automations years ago. A recent event in Node-RED during an upgrade had me thinking about whether or not Node-RED is still a requirement for my home automation and whether or not I want the extra complexity and an additional add-on to continue running in my home platform. So in this video, I'm going to take one of my more complex automations and move them from Node-RED over to Home Assistant's native automation and configure it using the UI only to show how far along the Home Assistant automations have come, and also determine whether or not I should still run Node-RED or if I need to run Node-RED. So let's get started. So as always, take just a minute to talk about what Node-RED is in case you're not familiar. Node-RED is low-code programming for event-driven applications. It's basically a tool for wiring together hardware devices, APIs, and other things in all kinds of ways. It has a browser-based editor, makes it easy to wire together flows and all that, so you can just kind of tie everything together. And you can see in my particular setup here how I have all of these different nodes all tied together to do different things. So why did I decide to use Node-RED in the first place? Well, early on in the Home Assistant days, and Home Assistant is basically my exclusive platform for home automation stuff, the requirement was to write most everything in YAML. YAML is not hard, but YAML, if you're first starting out, is a little bit of a challenge, especially if you're using a new platform such as Home Assistant and you've never done anything. So what I did was I took Node-RED, which is, like I said, easy to use the web browser and wire things together to create automations that are quickly up and running, and I don't have to do a lot of coding to make them work. Home Assistant has come a very long way since I started using Node-RED. So I thought I would try moving over one of my more complex automations into Home Assistant using the native UI there available now and see what happens. Turns out, and this is a spoiler, I moved all of my automations in about 2 to 3 hours from Node-RED over to Home Assistant using just the UI in most cases, and I haven't had any issues since. So I can actually turn off Node-RED now and not use it for anything. So let me explain a little bit about the incident that happened. It really wasn't a big deal at all. It's basically a UI issue. It doesn't affect the way Node-RED runs. However, it did prompt me to start thinking about what I'm doing today, and that is moving things over from Node-RED. I don't really need to run Node-RED. It just adds extra overhead to my platform. It adds a little bit extra complexity. And there are some definite benefits to building things in the native UI in Home Assistant. One of them being that in some of the nodes, and I'll show you that in a little bit, you have to write JSON code in order to make things, or you have to format JSON in some of the nodes in order for things to work the way you want them to, versus just doing them directly in the UI in Home Assistant. So this little bug that I'm talking about is this. I do some stuff where I inject something at a specific time into some of my flows, and this right here no longer works. You're supposed to be able to click this little box right here and cause the inject to fire or this node to fire, but now all it does is it allows you to move it. It doesn't actually work anymore. There is a workaround. You can go to the IP address of your Node-RED instance to the port, which I think is 8081 or something like that, and it'll show you the UI and be able to do everything. So again, it's not a big deal. It just caused me to start thinking, and I thought I would try this out. It's something I've been wanting to do for a long time. So let me go into the actual flow or the actual automation that I'm going to be moving over to Home Assistant. I will take you through how that works here, and then we will go build that over in Home Assistant. It really is fairly simple. So this is a thing where the garage door sensor detects whether the garage door gets opened or closed, and I send that over to a switch here. And this switch then determines whether it's open or whether it's closed, and then it does a lot of things. The first thing it'll do is it'll notify me via pushover to my phone whether or not the door was open or closed. And then it comes over here and it looks at this node and it says it's the time between 8 a.m. and 9 p.m. If so, I want to announce over my smart speakers in the house that the garage door is open or closed. And then over here, you'll see there's also another box here that runs between sunset and basically midnight. If it's during that particular time, I want all of these lights to come on. Otherwise, these lights don't need to turn on. There are some areas where it seems to be dark in the house all the time. And so when I open the garage door, I want the kitchen, the garage hall light to come on. And I want the indicator on the back wall switch. I have a Zeus multi-scene switch on the back wall, and it tells me some things based on status of door locks and garage doors. And it sets the lights to a specific color, in this case, red or green. And then the other thing it does is when it does turn this garage hall light on, it starts a 10-minute timer. And then after 10 minutes, that light goes off. And then I also have an ultrasonic sensor in the garage. It turns that on, and then it sets a 2-minute timer. And that's enough time for the car to pull in, the sensor to do its job, and then I want it turned back off because I don't want that ultrasonic thing running unless it's needed. So that's the automation that I'm going to move over to Home Assistant. The complexity comes in the timer section. That thing is where I want to run, and I'll show you here again. I want to run 2 timers with different times on them, and I want them to do something when those timers expire to 2 different entities. So these 2 things actually need to run in parallel. And it's still not hard to do that in Home Assistant's automation. They've added a lot of building blocks, so that makes it fairly easy to do that. So let's get right into building this in Home Assistant. So I'm just going to go over here to the automations, and I'm going to create a new automation over here. And we're going to start adding triggers. And the triggers are going to be entity. We're going to click on entity, and we're going to look at the state of the entity. And this is a connected garage door. And in this case, I want it to go from, I just want it to, anytime it goes to open state. And then I'm going to give this an ID. I'm going to call this garage open. This is a trigger ID. I'm setting a couple triggers because I'm going to use those later on down below. And then I'll do another entity state, same thing. This is going to be the same connected garage door opener. And I'm going to change it when it changes to closed. I'm going to have this trigger, and I'm going to give this garage closed trigger. So I have my 2 triggers, and we'll use those later on down in this automation. And those 2 triggers basically take care of these 2 items right here. This is the state of the garage door, and then this switch tells or sends a path whether it's open or closed. So now I have 2 triggers to determine that. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to build this block. This always runs whenever the garage door is open. This condition will evaluate when the garage door opens. Let's say that. And so I'm going to add this as a condition. And that's down here. We're going to do an action here. We're going to use an if then. And you can click on add action or add building block. Either one, you just search for the if then. And our condition is going to be the sun. So I want to know if the sun is after sunset. So we'll use that condition. And then we'll add a second condition. And we will set the time. And we want to know if the time is before 11:59 p.m. And then we close these down. You'll see that you'll execute an action if it's after sunset and before 11:59 p.m. There are more than one way to do things. So what I did was I called this script rather than add the individual entities for turning on those lights and whatnot. I don't know why I use a script. It's very easy just to go in here and under adding the action, you could do a switch turn on or a light turn on or whatever else you want to do here. But you can make sure all of that stuff happens. But what I did was I did a script turn on instead, or just called the script. And I have a script called turn on lights, door unlock, or garage open. And now that I'm talking through this, I think I know why. I do have another automation that runs that when you unlock the doors, it also turns on the same lights. So it's easier to create a script and call that script. This script runs in more than one of my automations, and it's easier just to put it this way. So then after sunset, before 11:59, I turn on this script, which then turns on all of these lights right here and does all this stuff. So that part is done. So we can get rid of that or collapse that. Now I'm going to add another action. And this is a special building block called choose. This is the same as if then, but more powerful. So you can add a number of options. So option 1 is going to be a trigger. So I'm going to add a condition that is going to be triggered by, and it gives you the options of the triggers that you created above. So I have 2 different triggers I created and I gave them specific IDs. So I'm going to click on garage open, and then I'm going to perform a bunch of actions. So before I do that, let me show you that what we're doing here. So garage open is this one right here. We are going to, in this case, disarm the alarm. I'll save that one for not the video, but we'll turn on all of these lights right here. We'll set those different devices to specific colors, and then we'll set these timers and whatnot. This is probably the most complicated part of the entire automation. So we'll add our first action here. I'm going to send a notification to pushover so that it can tell me that the garage door is open. So garage door open. For some extra stuff, you can add here things like priority. These are things that the pushover API accepts. So you can type priority 0. And then I like to give, in pushover, I like to give things specific sounds. So when I'm listening, I can hear what that sound is. So in this case, I send myself a bugle sound via pushover, and that tells me that the garage door is open. That takes care of that. That is this right here, where you go in and you notify garage door open. And that, now if you look here, this is what I'm talking about with JSON, right? To make it easier in the UI, you don't need to do all this. But in Node-RED, you have to send a payload, the topic, the priority, and the sound, and then you have to return that message. So a little JSON block. You can see how easy it was for me just to go in here and do that with the UI. So super simple there. All right. And I'm looking over here to, I've done this already. So I'm looking over here to make sure I'm covering all the steps. All right. So now I want to do is I'm going to do the part where we look at the time. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to look at these times right here between 8 a.m. and 9 p.m. And I'm going to send an announcement via the media player. So we'll go over here and we'll create that now. This is going to be another if then. So I'm going to choose a building block here. So if then, and I'm going to do a time. Now with this time one, this is nice because you can do them both in the same block here. So after 8 a.m. and before, and if you put 2100, it'll change this to PM for you automatically. 2100. So 9 p.m. So after 8 a.m. and before 9 p.m. I don't know if weekdays includes weekends or not, but I have just gone in here and just selected all these things. And then if you look up here, it will tell you confirm the time is after 8 a.m. and before 9 p.m. So that's the conditional statement. And then if that's true, then you want to add an action. And in this case, let me just make sure I did it right here. I'm going to send an action to this media player. So I'm going to send a notification to Alexa Media Everywhere. And the message is going to say garage door open. And I do want to set the data as a type announce because that's required for that type of alert for this speaker. And that's it. If you come over here and you look at Node-RED, the first thing I have to do is the time, but then I have to come over here and I have to generate all this. So I have to create a JSON block and send all that information over in the JSON block versus just coming over here to the UI and setting it and we're done. So that's the if then part where we're actually turning on or doing these announcements. So we've covered all this right here. The same thing happens for the closing. It's the same setup. We'll get to that later on. All right, so we're going to close down this this action, and we're going to add a third action, which is going to be a little more complicated. It's still easy, and let me just show you what I'm trying to do here. When I change the color of this light to red, again, it's more of this information that has to go into the JSON block on Node-RED versus just doing it through the UI in Home Assistant. All right, so we're going to do a third action here, and it's going to be this right here where we set this light to red. And it makes it simple from the UI because all we have to do is add another action and we can start typing Z-Wave. And I'm going to set a device configuration parameter. And what it's going to do is open up all of this stuff where I can just set it directly. And if you look over here, if you remember, we looked at this right here. We want to set it to red. Looking at the JSON data, I want the LED parameter, button 1. Here, that's the parameter, and the value is going to be 3. So here's the parameter, put that right here. And then I'm going to set the value to 3. Now I don't know what the endpoint is, so I'm going to uncheck that. And that sets that value, the configuration parameter for that particular device. And I guess I need to put the entity ID, that would be helpful. The entity is going to be backdoor. There it is, switch back ports new. That's the entity it's going to apply this to. So it's going to send that over the Z-Wave network and set the light color on that particular device back there. So we took care of setting this right here. So now what we need to do is we need to go ahead and turn on some of these lights. So we'll do that next. Those lights always come on regardless of this right here. We've already got this set. We just need to turn the rest of the lights on. It's as simple as turning on a light switch. Switch turn on, and you can choose an entity here. We'll just say turn on the garage hall light. So it turns that on. It also will turn on kitchen pendant. So it turns those lights on. Simple thing there. And then this is where we get into a little bit of complexity. So I'm going to add a building block here called parallel. So I want to run some actions in parallel, and you'll see here we have this. Now what we're trying to do is we're trying to turn on this timer and turn on this timer in 2 different paths. So this would be one right here, and this will be run right here. We want those 2 things to fire, and actually it's this one. This one would run, and then this one would run. So I'm going to run these actions in parallel. I'm going to add the first action here, and it's going to be a switch turn on. Actually, before I do that, if you run this stuff, if you put a bunch of things in parallel, they're going to just run all together. So think of it as you have a line of things that come down off that particular flow, and then they all just kind of execute right here. You want them to come down, and you want them to execute in series inside of a parallel block, which is what we're going to do. I hope that made sense. So we're going to add another building block here. We're going to say series, is that the right word? Sequence, run in sequence. So you're putting a parallel or a sequence inside of a parallel, and we'll add a second parallel here in just a second. So under this particular sequence of actions, we want to do a switch turn on, and it's going to be, the entity is going to be the garage, add a matrix. And I want that to run for 2 minutes. So I'm going to add another action, which is going to be a wait for a period of time. And this would be 2 minutes. And then after that 2 minutes, we want this to turn off. So we're going to go back to switch turn off, and we're going to use the same entity, add a matrix. So now we have, in this particular sequence, turn on the atom matrix, wait for 2 minutes, and turn off the atom matrix. Now you see we have one action running in parallel. We want to add a second action here, which is another action in parallel. It's going to be another sequence. And now you will see I have 2 actions in parallel. This one's got 3 actions in the sequence. This one has 0. We're going to add some actions. So again, this is going to be a switch turn on. And this is going to be the garage hall. And we're going to add another action in this sequence. It's going to be the wait timer. That's going to be for 10 minutes. And then our final action will be switch turn off. And that will be the garage hall once again. So you have 3 actions in this sequence: turn on the garage hall, wait for 10 minutes or delay for 10 minutes, and then turn it off. And these 2 things are now going to run in parallel. So that takes care of this whole block of stuff right here, where you turn on the lights and set the timers and then turn them off after a specific amount of time. And that covers the entirety of the opening of the garage door, all the things that happen. Again, the alarm, I'm not going to show you that one. It involves some other things I'm not going to show on the video, but you can disarm your alarm system or do other things. You can add anything you really want to this. What I mentioned earlier was the complexity of this. Again, it's the parallel running of 2 different things at the same time. That causes a little bit of a complexity. That is all of the garage open stuff. The same thing happens for the garage closed. And I will just show you that under the one I've already completed. First, I need to save this. And I'm going to show you the one that is done already that I did earlier, so you don't have to watch me build it. One thing I also do want to show you on this one, once it loads, is I want to show you the traces up here. This is how you debug things. You can see what I was talking about when I said parallel versus sequence. If we look at when the garage door was opened earlier, we start up here with the event to show the garage door was open. And then it takes and chooses the path based on the conditions. And then it goes through all those steps that we talked about and decides everything. And then down here is what I'm talking about, where we have the parallel stuff running. And one thing I didn't do here in this one is I didn't turn the switches on. I turned the lights on, the Atom Matrix and Garage Hall in an earlier part of this. And as I'm redoing it for the video, I think it's better to do it down below. Anyway, so I have the lights on up here somewhere, but then the timer fires off and waits for 10 minutes. And after the 10 minutes, this particular Garage Hall goes off. This timer also fires at the same time because we're running these in parallel. That runs for 2 minutes. And then we turn off the Atom Matrix. So you can see how all of that works. Now let me show you the final garage closing thing. The garage closing, again, is this path here. Same thing, notify via pushover, notify via an announcement during a certain time, and really nothing else on the garage door closing because it is not as extensive. So when it's closed, again, oops, I'm looking at the wrong option here. I do want to point out that you do have two options here. When you specify the different options under the choose building block, then here you have option 1 where we did the opening, and here's the option 2 where we closed. And all we have here is that same trigger when it's triggered by the garage closed that we set up above. Send in a notification. Conditionally execute, which means that we want to make sure that it's after 8 a.m. and before 9 p.m. that will make the voice announcement on the smart speaker. And then we set that same parameter on the back porch lights or back porch switch that sets the LED indicator color to green from red. So it resets that back there. And that's it. That is an automation that I've moved over from Home Assistant, or from Node-RED over to the Home Assistant native automations. Now, one other thing I do want to show you is basically the number of automations that I moved. And for that, I'm going to show you based on filters here. Let me get rid of that. This is a neat thing about adding these tags and labels and categories and stuff. You can actually filter by these. So everything I moved over from Node-RED, I wanted to make sure that I could go back and see. Well, I'm not doing well, am I? And it's persistent, right? It keeps your filters. So these are all the things that got moved. I've got announcements for gates opening and closing, the garage door we talked about. Lights are on or off based on the door opening, the actual person door, and also motion in the garage. Alarm actions, outside light actions, all kinds of stuff that I've moved from Node-RED over to the Home Assistant automation. All of this took me about maybe 2 to 3 hours in total. It was not bad at all. The reason I was so hesitant was that I spent a lot of time building this stuff in Node-RED, and I wasn't sure how that was going to translate into the Home Assistant native automations. I will say that the advancements made in the Home Assistant automation area has made it possible to seamlessly move everything over, basically using the UI. I don't remember any point where I had to do actually any code. The data blocks and some of the parameters for the Z-Wave are all fillable in the UI. You don't even have to do any YAML at all. I will post this entire YAML code over into my blog, which is linked down below, so you can see this. You can import that. It's not a blueprint. It's just the YAML code. You could actually create it and then modify it. I do want to show it to you, though, on the video here. So let's just take a quick look at the YAML. And you can edit this whole thing in YAML. And this is the kind of thing you would have to build out in the automation via YAML if they didn't have it via the UI. And this is one of the reasons this turned me over to Node-RED at the very beginning. And I'm talking 4 or 5 years ago beginning, not last week, not 2 months ago. Automations have been coming along for a long time. And it was just time to try and move it all over. And I was successful. Works great. I haven't had any issues. I don't have to worry about Node-RED crashing, which by the way, it sometimes does. There you go. If you have any questions, down below in the comments, also on Discord. If you've watched this long video, I really appreciate it. Thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing. And for those that support me in the various ways, thank you so much for that. It helps me continue what I do here. And with that, we will see you on the next video.